So Jay, just maybe introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work, your background, and even your service now at GU on our Smart Experience Institute board.
Sure. Jay Walsh, I'm the Vice President for Economic Development Innovation for the University of Illinois System. Also a faculty member at Urbana, Champaign, so UIUC, in bioengineering. Been an academic for 35 years or so. It's getting up there, and a bioengineer the whole time. And the short background on that is I do biomedical optics, diagnostics and therapeutic uses of light. So that's my sort of academic background. Previous to this job at the U of I was at Northwestern University, and I was the vice president for research there for a dozen years. So when that stint was done, I was thinking of what to do, and the president at the University of Illinois asked me if I wanted to join his team, and had never worked at a public university before, and thought this would be a good opportunity to see a different aspect of academia. So
Dr. Walsh, I know you don't brag on yourself, but I do think if I looked it up at Northwestern, you ended up raising like $798 million for Northwestern and all sorts of research grants, and started over 50 institutes. Can you just talk a little bit about your work with that institution that led you to
Yeah, so when I started as a vice president for research, we were, I don't know, something on the order of $450-ish million a year in research. And over those 12 years, we grew to just under 900 million. So we grew just over 90% per year. So we were up, at about 900 million a year. When I started, we had about 20 institutes that were university wide, and when I ended, we were just over 50 of those, 50. So what really was going on there was what has been happening worldwide in academia, and that is that the most interesting areas are often, not always, but often at intersections of disciplines. So, to grow those aspects of academia, you do have to pull people together from across universities. So it can't just be somebody in the School of Medicine or the College of Arts and Sciences or the engineering school or the business school or the law school. Sometimes you have to pull those folks together. And to do that, you often create a center or an institute that allows those folks those faculty, those researchers to work together. So that was really the strategy there, was to develop that. And we did that not only within the university, but we did that with external partners. So probably the most impactful one was an institute we built between Northwestern and Argonne National Lab. So Argonne National Lab is one of the Department of Energy labs. It was actually the first Department of Energy lab. It started just outside of Chicago. It's now, a rather large operation. It started with just nuclear related things, but it does a number of different areas where it has real expertise, and that overlapped well with Northwestern. Frankly, it also overlaps well with the University of Illinois, where we're developing stronger and stronger relationships with Argonne. And so that allows you to create new knowledge, which is really interesting. And to some extent, I think that was why the president of the University of Illinois was interested. I had met him on the Argonne board. He and I both serve on that. And, we had a couple of conversations, just casual conversations. And, then when I had stepped down, he reached out and said, hey, you like developing relationships across institutions, within the institution and across institutions. And Suzanne, that's actually how you and I became connected, is because, I'm working at the U of I and I'm looking at Greenville and going, maybe we should work together.
Yeah, so it's been a ride. Of course, we kind of started during a little thing called COVID, a global pandemic, with some of our collaboration. And I remember I felt like we had like a tiger by the tail, right? Because
Mhm.
it's the big University of Illinois system, and we're trying to add value from a small rural location, kind of testing site. And so maybe it's a little different from your perspective. I'm just curious, why the partnership with Greenville University during COVID?
So a couple of things I would say. So first, take a half step back. When all of us worldwide, really, in March of 2020, said, "Hey, it's time to go home. There's a pandemic. We don't want to spread this virus so much." At the University of Illinois, we asked the question, how do we come back and come back safely in the fall? So that our students, they would be away for sort of 6 weeks in the spring semester of 2020, but then they would come back in the fall and be safe. So there was this saliva test that was developed to test for COVID. And if you tested positive for COVID, we had a place to isolate you and, maybe your friends who were possibly positive also. And that was how you and I connected, because you heard about this test and you came to us and said, "Hey, can we do that also?" That's the short version. You probably have a version too, but and I looked at this and I thought, okay, we're going to do this test on a major campus, okay, 50,000 students and 10,000 staff. And it would be nice to know if this also worked in a smaller environment and what the challenges were to having this work in a smaller environment. So that when you came to us, I thought, bingo, that's a great place to go. It's a small university in a more rural part of the state. And very candidly, President Davis, I saw a great partner. I saw an opportunity to work with somebody who, was willing to go with the flow on this, because we were trying to get this up and running, and there were challenges that were going to be had. So
Yeah.
it was a great environment, and it was an opportunity, frankly, to work with you.
Well, it was a great opportunity working with all of you. You did just such a phenomenal class act job throughout COVID. It was great to be partnered, and it from my perspective, it all started too with kind of a mutual friend of Ed McMillan, former CEO of Purina, and so we kind of knew each other through him and serving on various capacities and boards with him. And he said, why don't you call up Dr. Colleen? This was back in, I think, January of 2020, and just see if he ends up coming up with something. So actually, before I met you, I had several conversations with Dr. Colleen, the president at the University of Illinois, as an alum. He took my call, and I just thought that was amazing tribute to just who the University of Illinois is as an institution, that they're willing to engage with alums, and big and small, didn't matter. And I think it was just a huge honor to work with all of you as just a class act, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. As I said, you were a class act too, and very candidly, when Ed said, President Davis, she'd be great to work with, I'm like, got it. You
got a referral. That's great.
It's a great reference.
That's good. So you even, I believe, testified in one of the congressional committees about Greenville University as a partner. I believe we showed up on C-SPAN. At least several alums told me that they heard about us on C-SPAN. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So that was during the pandemic. It would have been September of 2020. I was asked to testify in front of Congress. It was somewhat related to COVID. It was more related to expanding research broadly, and there was some specificity to COVID, but it was broader. And where Greenville came up is, in the context of what we just talked about, and that is that, this is not a country that is just based in some large cities. it's very easy to focus on solutions in large cities. There's a reasonable fraction of the country that is outside those cities. So in the middle of that testimony, I brought up Greenville University. I think the folks in Congress were surprised that this guy who lives in Chicago and works for the University of Illinois, this big, is bringing up Greenville. But I viewed it actually as a real opportunity to bring up the idea that this is not just about cities, and this is not just about big institutions. There is a broader spectrum in the United States, and Greenville University in particular is a really good example of that. So I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about, Greenville.
It was great. Here you are, MIT, Harvard, at a grad, and then, University of Illinois executive. And so everyone was telling me, I can't believe you guys got a shout out on the congressional floor. And I was like, hey, just, it was a good time just partnering. I think we had crushed COVID, which was what you were able to tell everyone too. We had the crushing of COVID meant 2 straight weeks of zeros.
Yep.
With everybody testing, I believe, according to the slide.
Well, you had a few positives early on, and the whole purpose of the testing was to find the positives before they spread this across the whole institution. So then you had a whole bunch of zeros, which, at some level you start thinking, well, why are we testing? If everybody's negative, why are we testing? And it's kind of the whole point. You find the 1 or 2, and then you don't have everybody.
Right. And we kind of did it on the honor system with our students, with our background being Christ-like character and service. That's our mission statement. So we really leaned into that as the reason why it's important that you report. We didn't do as much of the technology side as the University of Illinois did, but our students really saw it as their social kind of responsibility, because, it could be that you didn't tell someone you were contact trace, if you didn't, then it could be their grandmother that's at risk, or someone in their family that's immunocompromised. And so we really did lean into our values. And I think that's what helped us during the pandemic.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on that. Here we sit in, now we're in, March, almost April of 2023, and you look at what COVID looks like now. And it's frankly, it's a different disease now than it was then. And more than 90% of us have seen this either through a vaccine or through the disease itself. So, we as humans have also changed in our respect to this virus. But back then, people were getting sick and dying, and it was not a good disease. It was a much more virulent form of virus at that time. And where I'm headed with this is we did end up publishing a paper out of the U of I looking at the impact of those who had testing programs. And in Urbana, Champaign in particular, we had 1/4 of the deaths in the whole area, not just on campus, but in the whole area, than what would have been expected based upon data from other large areas that had, that were in this time frame. So the testing program and the mitigation strategies that were part of that, the isolation, the quarantine, and the all that sort of stuff. It is absolutely clear statistically, and we published this in Nature, that we saved lives, not just on campus, but beyond the campus, which gets to your point.
Yeah.
That the students bought in, and they were protecting the elderly, and they were protecting the immunocompromised.
And certainly in a small town where Greenville University resides, literally within a block of the town square, we were the biggest risk factor, bringing people from all over the globe to our campus. We're the biggest risk factor by far in the county and the whole region, really. So that's why I think our students just really took that to heart. Our faculty and staff certainly did. So
yeah.
Anyway, well, let's talk about your role now at University of Illinois as Vice President for Economic Development and Innovation. And you've talked a little bit about your work in that space. and you've started all these, 50 different institutes, and like you said, have very interconnected research from various areas, and now you're bringing that expertise to Greenville University. Has an LLC called the Smart Experience Institutes that has the Experience Institute in Nashville, which works mainly in the music industry, and Experience Institute Dallas that is around healthcare and especially hospice certification. And so it's a little bit different, a lot smaller in both dollars and in people. But what can you say about your experience, both past and now present, with Greenville University, and how, I don't know. So why serve on Greenville University's Smart Experience Institute board?
Well, it gets back to why I reached out to you originally relative to the COVID testing. And that is, it's far too simple to try to do things in big environments where you have lots and lots of people of particular expertise, and that's very different than putting together effective groups within a smaller environment. And I had a sense of that previously, but I really wanted to understand that better. And so candidly, it's an opportunity for me to learn from the experiences that you all have in Greenville. And I also see through the Smart Experience Institutes an outreach to other organizations. So I mentioned in the previous life, I had connected, Northwestern with Argonne. They had been connected, but I connected them in a more significant way. This was also, how this was a similar thing, only on a different scale. And the question was, how does that work? How does Greenville connect in Nashville? And how does Greenville connect in Dallas? And how do you leverage the strengths of both sides? And I had a sense of how that worked, and I figured I could give you that sense and relay that experience that I had. And I could also learn. I'm an academic. I've been an academic since, I don't know, kindergarten. And I love to learn. So, it's an opportunity for me also to learn. So I can bring my experience, and I can learn from you all. And also, my job now at the University of Illinois is a job that links across the entire state. So, I go to Carbondale periodically and work with Southern Illinois University in Carbondale and in Edwardsville. I end up in Northern Illinois University and Western Illinois and Macomb and Eastern, I'm going to all sorts of places that are related to my job, connecting public universities, which is part of what I do. But I also want to have an experience of understanding how other institutions that are not public institutions do the similar things in environments that are not an urban environment that I've lived in my whole life.
We've talked a lot about that, and just, you attended, I believe, a private liberal arts college for undergrad, and then have been part of Ivy League. Was that not the case?
No, well, it was private. I'm not sure MIT is liberal arts.
Oh, okay. I was thinking your undergrad was at a different place. So
no, I did take classes at a small private college. Also, it's very similar reasons. I wanted to see what classes were like.
Okay.
We had an exchange program with a.
Okay. So that doesn't really work, but
No.
let's talk about like the nature. We'll scratch that part. Let's talk about the nature of state schools and public institutions versus private institutions versus, institutions like Greenville University that were started actually by the church, the Free Methodist Church, in this situation, and just the different roles that they kind of play in society, and how there's, obviously advantages and disadvantages to each one, but just the unique role that you're seeing them play in society.
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty different. And, there's on the order of 4,000 colleges and universities in this country. And, you and I both know there's rankings. I happen to think they're largely baloney. I understand why they happen, but the thing is that the experience you get at a university or a college or wherever you go is one that is pretty different and unique depending upon where you go. And, it's a matter of matching what your interests are, at least for those 4 years or so that you're at a university, with what they have to offer. So, if you go to a large university, University of Illinois, Urbana, Champaign, or Chicago, those are big universities, and they offer things that you're not going to find at a small university. Okay. On the flip side of that is the sort of intimacy that you get in a smaller university, where you get to know the faculty better, you get to know your classmates better, and you get to know staff in a different way. That's important. For some students, that's much more important than being able to take a diversity of classes that you're just not going to see at a smaller place. So I've had this range of experiences. Mostly my experiences as far as personally have been at large places, large research universities. Undergraduate was MIT, graduate was joint with Harvard University. Talk about putting two large universities together and, connecting them. And Northwestern was smaller when I started there in the 80s, but, it was pretty big when I was finished there. And, and the U of I is large. For me personally, understanding a smaller university is important. And, I'm not going to go back to being 18 again, as much as any of us might wish that we could be 18 again. It's not going to happen. So this is as close as I can get is to link with a small university. And I'm really appreciative of the fact that I can do that. And
so you used to be, speaking of 18, you used to be a soccer star right here, right? Like back in the day?
Yeah, I played all through college. I was co-captain of the varsity team at MIT. Played a little bit after that. But graduate school became kind of the thing that I was doing. And eventually that's the sport you eventually stop playing. You can ride horses when you're 18 and you can ride horses for a long time after, it's in your background there. I had to stop playing that sport.
I had to stop playing volleyball last year. I decided it was time to hang it up because I tore my ACL playing in the alumni volleyball game. Not a good idea now. So there's some things you should just naturally retire from. But I love the Division I, well, I think it's specifically Big Ten, the commercials around most of the athletes are going pro in something else, which is, of course, what you did. And of course, the co-curricular activities, I think, help us for leadership. I was captain of my volleyball team, all the Division III and all this, but don't you think that some of that co-curricular really prepares you for leadership, especially like a crisis like COVID?
Yeah, I really do. I think that's absolutely vital. And that's one of the things that American universities do really well is that not only is there a classroom and academic experience, there's an extracurricular and outside of classroom activity. For me, it was two things. One was it was soccer, and the other was I was in a fraternity. Now, most people have a view of fraternities that's in
the 80s especially.
And that's where I was. But this is a fraternity, to give you a sense. We now have a seminar series, and we've the graduates include people who have developed the robotic vacuum cleaner, the Roomba, Guitar Hero, there's venture capitalists there, there's a former astronaut, there's a former ambassador to a country in Europe. When we bring these folks in the seminar series, and so to some extent, we haven't left our nerdly backgrounds that we were when we were at MIT. We can be silly also, but the really interesting part about that was the friendships that developed that have continued for decades now, and and those get seeded. One of the important things that students learn when you're at a university is those friends that you're making are friends for a lifetime. You're going through an experience of going from, living with your parents, when you were in high school, to launching into complete independence as you go through college. And you're doing that with people who are very special in your life. And they will be for a very long time. And that develops bonds that transcend a whole lot of things. So, I did that with soccer, and for me, it was lucky I did it with soccer and a great bunch of people in a fraternity. Certainly we had fun, but we also, we grew up together, and we continue to do that. So I feel
that's
lucky.
invaluable. I actually said that to a group of students and parents. We had it's basically the day where they get their IDs and things for this coming fall. And so I was, talking to them and said, we don't just offer a degree, yes, but it's a whole resume of experiences, and that could be curricular, co-curricular, all the things you can get involved in, and clubs and things. And then, we offer a connection base that will last a lifetime. We've been graduating students of character and service for over 130 years. And it's remarkable to be a part of that alumni base, and the connections that the people that you're sitting next to left and right, these will be your friends for a lifetime, and so I really think that's what happens on undergraduate campuses. And I think you're right that that's getting lost a little bit in all of the US News and World Reports and rankings, and even the Chronicle to some extent. Like, I think, I think parents would agree that at 18, students just don't go out and grow up all of a sudden.
Yeah.
There's a time of learning. There's a time of learning life skills, and just that being out of the parents' home for the first time is a big deal.
Yeah. And learning to listen to peers and take in information from them and develop together. This happens to all sorts of alumni groups. It's been great to get to know some of the alums through the board at Greenville, and just watch that interaction. And, sometimes they've known each other from undergraduate days, and sometimes they're off by 5 years, 10 years, but they still share an experience in a place that has a culture that transcends just time. It's across generations, and it's really fun to sit in those meetings and watch different generations of former students interact, and they have a bond, which is really wonderful.
Same kind of value system, I think, that you see, and so that there's a value proposition, as we would call it in business, going all the way through that lifetime of the institution, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So, I don't know, any, words of wisdom that you would have, any final word that you have about, maybe how GU is doing economic development and innovation differently, but, that keeps you coming back.
Well, so there's a couple things I would say. First of all, I grew up in a small town. I've lived in a city since I was 18, but, I grew up in a small town. So there's part of me that drives through Greenville and goes, I'm home. You have horses. I never had a horse. The people who owned the house before us had a horse. Okay, so my bike was stored in a garage, not in a garage. It was stored in the barn. We had a barn. So there's some aspects. So to some extent, Suzanne, this is great. I get to go home. But words of wisdom, to the students, you're at a great place. Enjoy the fact that you're at a place that knows what is its core, and the people you're surrounded by are really wonderful people, because they've selected to come to a place like Greenville for very similar to reasons to whatever anybody else who's a student there is selected. So there's going to be a lot of camaraderie in that, which is really, it's been, on times I've been on campus, it's really wonderful to see. As far as economic development is concerned, I suspect, no, my impression is that economic development in Greenville is very similar to economic development in a lot of other places. You have to try a whole bunch of different things to see what is going to work. You have some idea, some concept of this might be really helpful. And sometimes you're right, and sometimes you learn by it not being right.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah.
Right. And I think that goes for every economic development play I've been involved with. To some extent, it's a variation on, startup companies. Startup companies have an idea as to what direction you're going to go in. But you have to be open to recognizing that you're going to learn along the way. And you might see an opportunity that is a better fit for where you're headed. You might start off and it's dead on. It works perfectly, okay? But keep your mind open to other opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's true for entrepreneurship, economic development, and even higher ed at this point in time. And what we're seeing is some of what we're trying in both Nashville and Dallas, and some of the things on campus. I mean, it's kind of, I think actually our mutual acquaintance, Ed McMillan, used to call it intrapreneurship, where you're doing it within institutions that already exist. And sometimes that's even more difficult.
Yeah. No, certainly what you're doing in Dallas and Nashville is really, that's outside the institutional walls, although you're pulling students in. So, it's at this border of intra and entrepreneurial. But let me talk about Dallas for a second. When you first started that, I took a deep breath and I said, okay, where are we headed here? It is incredibly on brand, and it's a fantastic opportunity. So, I look forward to, seeing how this evolves and moves forward. And, maybe all the plans that we're making are exactly in line. And it is entirely probable that there is going to be great successes here, maybe in areas that we didn't think of. But you've got a good board and you've got a good group of people on both ends, both in Dallas and in Greenville, that are working well together in a very important area.
Yeah, I sat in on a meeting similar to what our students will do in Dallas. I just did that this past Wednesday, actually, and talk about on brand in terms of, you have this interconnected group. You have medical professionals, social workers, chaplains, even like family counselors and grief coordinators and all the admin staff, and they come together in a room and work patient by patient through the issues, not just what meds, but how are the family members doing? How are they doing, as they're, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, physically facing death. It's hard to not just see this like whole picture of what you want as we try to train holistic students. You can just see how this would present them with an amazing opportunity that usually you might only get at the graduate level, but being able to do that at the undergraduate level is, I think, going to be something very special.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree totally. There are aspects of these interactions that the students will have with professionals and with families and with the patients that are going to be transformative for them. It's going to allow them to grow a lot within themselves.
Yeah, I learned a lot that day. Sometimes, as we get older, we don't think we learn, or we don't seek those opportunities. But I was like, wow, I would love to come to this semester long experience myself. So
Yeah,